Move next to the camera. You get a better view.
Madam Mayor, distinguished trustees, friends of Malvern, I want to say on behalf of my dad and my mom who are here today and my brother and sisters, thank you for this recognition. My grandfather got married in 1920, just a few years after finishing a stint in the Italian army in World War I. Within a couple of months after he was married, he came to America, leaving his, unbeknownst to him, pregnant wife in Italy, pregnant with my dad, Pasquale, and came to this country and ended up in Rockville Center, looking for work as a barber. He couldn't find work, and he got in touch with his brother up in Utica, who had come here prior to him, and his brother convinced him to come to Utica and work as a tailor. Because in those days, I'm told, barbers were also tailors. So he went to Utica, and he hated it. He was there only a few months, and he decided to come back here. Came back to Rockville Center. There was a large Italian community in Rockville Center, and he started looking around in different towns for a job as a barber. He came to Malvern, and at the time, the business district in Malvern was right down the road on Broadway by the firehouse. There were a few stores there, and that was the business community. All of this was woods and farmland. And there was, appropriately named, the Malvern Barbershop. He got a job there with the barber and started working. In about 1925, he made a trip back to Italy to see his wife, not having seen her since 1920. You got to remember, in those days, there was no commercial airlines, there was no television, there was no phones, really, to speak of. The only way you communicated with people was in a letter. And those letters didn't go airmail. They went by boat. So it was a tough time for him. When he got back to Italy in 1925, he saw for the first time his almost 5-year-old son, Pat. He then had to come back here and continue to work to save money to bring his family to this country. In 1926, he bought the Malvern Barbershop from its previous owner. And in 1927, when the building behind you, the Ryder Building, was built, he moved his business to 34 Church Street, right next door to, or a few doors down from, his then good friend, Tony Canzoneri. And as the story goes, and Joe alluded to it a little bit, the two of them lived in a basement apartment at the Ryder Building, sharing that place, eating together, living together, working towards that dream to bring their families here. And in 1928, finally, my grandfather was able to bring his family here, his wife and his son, and they settled in Rockville Center first. In fact, I think, as the story goes, the Canzoneris and the Carbones rented a two-family house in Rockville Center where they both lived together, both clans. Finally, in 1934, he was able to buy his own house at 78 Charles Street, which is that house around the corner from the Cork and Board, which, by the way, when I was a kid, used to be a toy store. Then it became the patio, the Cork and Board for many years now. But that was his house for the remainder of his life. And he continued to do business here at the Malvern Barbershop. One point I'd like to make that not too many people know is, during those Depression years, my grandfather started a ritual that he carried on for near 40 years. On Sundays, after Mass, he would get a bag and put his tools in it, and he would travel around to different towns, Rockville Center, Lynbrook, Malvern, and he would give haircuts and shaves to those people who were out of work, didn't have a job, couldn't afford to pay for it. If they could give him something, that was great, but if they didn't, that was fine too. And he did that for quite a few years. In fact, he was still doing it when we were in grammar school. Both my brother and I and my sisters all went to Our Lady of Lourdes, and he was still doing it then. And I always remember as a kid going to Our Lady of Lourdes that you could always tell the guys who got their hair cut by my grandfather. Because you see, my grandfather only gave 2 haircuts. You either got a crew cut or you got a pompadour. And the pompadour had white walls. There's a lot of young people here today probably don't even know what white walls are, but you see, kids, years ago cars used to have white wall tires. And that's what we used to name these things, because he would shave you all the way around your ears and very tight up the side, and then you had a pompadour. And how did that pompadour stand up, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. You see, my grandfather also made this green gel, affectionately called green gook, green slime. He concocted this stuff in the back of his store and put it in glass jars and sold it to the young fellas for $0.25 a bottle or 50 cents, whatever it was. You see, when you put that stuff on your comb and you combed that pompadour, well, you just about didn't have to comb your hair for a month because it just stood there like a rock. You know, on any given Saturday, you could walk down Church Street and you'd probably have to detour almost into the street around all the bikes that were piled up in front of his shop. He loved kids. He had a very comprehensive comic collection for them. Because back in those days, we didn't have text messaging and things like that. He loved kids. And he went on to run that business until he couldn't, and finally it was actually kept open until his passing in 1979. You know, I remember my grandfather fondly, and as a kid growing up, I always thought he's a very simple man. He's a barber, he has a day-to-day life. What I realized as I got older, he got married and had children, he had terrific values. What was important to him was his wife, his kids, his family, his friends, his work. He loved his work. He took great pride in the wine he made every year. Every year in that house, in October, we went through the ritual of taking the cases of grapes off the flatbed truck and bringing them down to his wine cellar, where he proudly hung his New York State license permit to create wine for personal consumption. And he'd make about 150 gallons of wine, I think, every year and give it to his friends and family. But, I mean, the things that were important to him are really the most important things in life today. And you know, my son is standing there in the back, Perry, with his lovely wife, Lauren. They were just married in September, the first of his 16 great-grandchildren to be married. And I look at my son and my daughter-in-law and I say, that's the age my grandfather was when he came to this country. Great strength, great character, great fortitude, great determination. And I just want to say to the town of Malvern that we are all grateful that you're dedicating this tree today and remembering him and recognizing the fact that he and Tony Canzoneri and people like them are the reason this town is as wonderful as it is. And again, on behalf of my mother and father and myself and my brother and sisters, I want to thank you all. Thank you.